How
How
you
are you?
doing? I'm good. I'm good. I'm a little tired today, I'll be honest, but I'm hanging in there and very excited to be speaking with you tonight. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to have this conversation. It feels like it's a few months of the making.
That's right. Yes. Down the Rabbit Hole has been going for about 5 episodes now. And, most of our focus has been on guests from the music industry who have either been speaking to their own experience as either an artist of color or someone seeking to better um, better themselves as an accomplice,
Hmm.
especially if they're a white person. We've had a Yale professor talk to us about the origin of Black music and how we can better understand ownership and move forward in a way where we try to make a difference in the future generation. But we haven't really talked too much about what practical organization really looks like. It's all
Hmm.
very well to have the big ideas about how we want to dismantle racism in the music industry, but someone like yourself has dedicated her career to actually making things move. And I wanted you to just start by talking about a little bit about what you do for people and how that relates to the time that we're in now, how it can be useful.
Yeah, sure. So right now I am a consultant, which feels like a dirty word, but I basically help campaigns and specifically candidates sort of really navigate the field when they decide to run for office. I specifically help people who are insurgents, who are very kind of left, who don't have institutional support. So basically that knowledge base to help them navigate through that.
Yep.
But I've been in politics since 2013. I first started with a mayoral campaign to elect Bill de Blasio, and Bill de Blasio was not who he is today.
Mm-hmm.
For those watching, Bill de Blasio is the mayor of New York City. Um, but I sort of used that time working in the mayor's office to really acquaint myself with systems,
Yep.
with how city government operated, with this idea, because I was living in Spanish Harlem at the time, with this idea that if government can be used to take away resources, government can be used to subjugate, government can be used to marginalize, and then government can, on the other side of that coin, also be used as a tool to help people, to provide resources, and to help equalize the situation for folks as well. So I've just sort of been in politics since then, doing organizing on this concept of like, if I learn how a system is broken, then I can better learn how to fix it.
Mm.
So that's a bit of what I do
Yep.
in sort of kind of a nutshell. But it's what I apply to everything that I do. Just making sure that I know how something works, how something is broken, so that I can just replace it with what's supposed to work.
Yeah, that's great. And so applicable to the theme of Down the Rabbit Hole, which is understanding what's broken about the music industry and how we, as artists, as the young generation, can hopefully rebuild it. You talked to me about this really interesting concept when we were talking earlier about power mapping.
Oh,
And I
yes.
really love, yeah, I'd love you to unpack that again, because first of all, I just want to understand it better myself. But I think it is such a brilliant way to look at hierarchy and also like what the first step is in understanding who we need to be talking to
Yeah,
and who has the power to make change.
sure. Let me actually grab my notebook so I can show
Please,
folks
yeah,
what
I
we
love
did.
that. Bring the
Okay.
notes. Yes.
Um,
I like this. An organized woman, you
Here we go.
know?
So power mapping is a concept that we use in organizing spaces, basically to sort of, whenever there's a big thing that you want to undertake, you want to figure out who are the people that impacts, and who
Yep.
are the people who have influence over that. And you basically create this axis. Can you all see? I don't know if it's backwards. On this axis is influence, on this, and on the lower end is no power. So this person has a lot of influence, this person has a lot of power. On one side you're opposed, on this side you are in favor of. So let's say what we wanted to do, what we wanted to affect, and how I met Kimbra was to defund the NYPD.
Yep.
Part of that is really figuring out who are the people who have a say over defunding the NYPD. We know it's the mayor. So basically what I would do, let's start with the mayor. Mayor has the most influence in this sort of situation, but I don't think that he was in favor. So we would put him over here. So you sort of start to map people. We've got the mayor, we've got the city council, we've got the NYPD themselves. You've got the people in communities, and you put them somewhere on this chart, and you start to ask yourself, if they have a lot of influence, but they are opposed, how do you get them from opposed to in favor? And if they are in favor, but they don't have much influence, how do you increase their influence? Basically, you want to make sure that everyone ends up on this side of the chart, where they have a lot of influence and a lot of power. Because when you get to the point where you have a ton of people over here, that's when you sort of have critical mass, essentially.
Wow.
And critical mass is like when you have enough to actually get the thing that you need. So that's what power mapping is. And I honestly use it for any time there's an issue that I want to solve, or I want to figure out how to solve, and it feels gargantuan and I don't know where to begin. You begin with the power map. You start to sort of really figure out, who are the people that have influence over this that I need to push in one way or the other, and how do I pull those levers?
Yeah. Thanks for explaining that. I want these conversations to really be of course covering the spectrum of experience.
Michael, how could, like, you're coming in here saying some wild ass shit about capitalism.
Nice. Thank you, Michael.
Capitalism has lifted people out of poverty. Get the fuck out of here with that shit. All right, back to you, Kimbra.
Yeah, we'll just let that one slide. No, listen, I think so much of what I'm feeling in the conversations is the importance of white people engaging this moment in a really serious way. And I, as a person trying to learn and trying to understand, I want to understand what it means to be an accomplice, not just an ally. And I think a big part of that has been information, getting myself equipped with information, because, being a New Zealander, a person of privilege, I haven't had to understand a lot of things, which is the terrible, conditioning of this world, is that when the world's designed for you, you don't have to work as hard to find out about your history. But this is an important moment for me to do that work, and hopefully for people tuning in tonight. Now, when one wants to garner information on something as massive as systemic racism, and also political, agenda around racism, how do you think one starts with that? Because, for example, the defund the police thing was kind of hard for me for a while. I didn't fully understand what I was saying in the protests when I had my fist up. Sometimes I felt conflicted about what that actually fully meant. And when you unpacked that for me, it was so helpful to have it spoken in sort of layman language, and it helped me feel empowered. I walked away from that really clear on where I stood, and knowledgeable to speak about it to people from that. And as a political campaign organizer, I imagine that that's a big part of what you do, is making things understandable. Yeah. If someone is new to this and really wanting to understand, what are some of the first steps?
I mean, honestly, the first step is going into it with curiosity, is going into it with humility, is making sure that you sort of have this pact with yourself that regardless of what information you're confronted with, that you're gonna use it, that you're gonna take it, that you're not gonna get defensive about it. Because when we're doing the work of anti-racism, that there's gonna be a lot of stuff about yourself that you're gonna be confronted with, about how you've been problematic or continue to be problematic.
Yes.
And so it's so important that it's not just about what you read, but sort of going into it with the right mentality, that you know that you're gonna just take these things one step at a time, that you are willing to just take down the things that you thought were true. Yeah. That you're willing to just admit that that you've behaved in a way that is racist or problematic or sexist or whatever it is. I know that's been the hardest part in my journey, but honestly, why I feel like I've grown. I couldn't have grown the way that I have in the last 10 years if I didn't go to it with that mindset of that regardless what happens, if someone says you're being racist, then I'm not going to say, then I'm not going to be insulted, but rather say, all right, fuck, I fucked up. What can I
Yep.
do to be better? How can
Yep.
I change this? How can I make sure that I never do that again?
Yes.
And that's like, that's really hard. Like, that's really hard to be confronted with that part of yourself.
Yeah. No, you're right.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think, we talked about this earlier. We're at a risky crossroads right now with the election coming up because as you so aptly said, there is a risk that regardless of who gets elected, white folk will unplug from this conversation, to put it in your words. Speak to me a little more about that. Like, how important is it that I mean, of course it's important. It's a kind of a silly question, but like, what are the threats that exist with the coming election, and what, as white folk or people of privilege, do we have to look out for in terms of telltale signs that this is, dissipating from the collective conversation?
yeah. I mean, I've already started to see it.
Yeah.
There was actually a tweet today that I saw from a white woman that
Yeah.
said, "What are we gonna angrily tweet about once we get rid of Trump?"
Well,
And like, obviously, people pounced on that. Well, not in her comments. In her comments, white people were like, "We could talk about puppies. We could talk about kitties." I'm like, I really fucking hope not.
yeah.
But like, you could sort of, maybe a little bit talk about that, but like, we still have to talk about wealth disparity, income inequality. We have to talk about seizing the means of production, which is basically like when we look at productivity and the way that it's increased over the years, and when we look at income and how that's increased over the years and that gap there, how do we start to close that gap? How do we make sure that folks have health care? How do we make sure that like your healthcare isn't tied to your job, so that when you go through a pandemic and millions of people lose their jobs, they're not also at the same time losing their healthcare? How do we get rid of student loan debt? Like, how do we, like, there are so many things that we're still going to need to tackle. There were issues before Trump that will continue to be issues after Trump. How do we demilitarize? How do we stop spending so much money on military? How do we stop, like, there's just so much. How do we like start spending more money on education? How do we make higher education free again? Like, there's just so much to do. That actually, like, when I say these things, doesn't make me feel kind of like overwhelmed. Oh shit, there's so much to do. It kind of gets me excited. Like, look at all the stuff that we get to fix. Look at all this stuff that we get to dismantle, that we get to like take on together in this moment. I just really hope that after this election, in the event that we do defeat Trump, that that people don't unplug. They don't start to feel like everything's fixed. That they do recognize all the systemic issues that still continue even after Trump. So
Yeah. So two things are coming up for me. I'm hearing you say like solidarity is a big one. You've got that excitement of like, we can come together and fix these things, and that to me
I mean,
seems.
look at what just happened in Bolivia. Look at what
Sure.
Bolivia did,
Okay.
dude.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
fascism took over Bolivia. The people that were fighting against this, they they were murdered. They were
Yeah.
incarcerated. They were like stalked. They like everything you could possibly do to them, and the workers still came together.
Wow.
The working class still came together, and they took down fascism. Like,
Wow.
that can happen.
It can. It can. We have examples of that. And I'd love you to explain, similar to how you did on our other conversation, how we kind of got here when it comes to racial solidarity versus class solidarity, and make that easy to understand, because it's not easy at first. But
Yeah.
how has America got to this place where the what did you say, the black man identifies, more with or rather the poor white man identifies more with someone like Trump than he does with the poor black man? And how did we get to that? Because that's such an important thing to understand when it comes to solidarity and creating a movement.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, all of this, when you sort of start to think like, how are our systems the way that they are? How is it that there's such um division.
Yeah.
And what people are saying are like this moment is divisive. Well, that was created. It didn't happen on its own. It was the foundation of this country, and it was done for a very specific purpose. You know, what I was telling you earlier today was the whole history of race as a construct was created specifically to separate people from the same class so that they were fighting with each other, so that white folks, poor and middle class white folks, felt like there was something aspirational to get to, and anybody else outside of that race was their enemy, when in fact the enemy was everybody with a ton of money who was looking to exploit them. You know, and part of why that was created was when Black people were given their freedom, when we dismantled slavery. I say dismantled because it still exists.
Yes.
We just evolved. But when that happened, Black people started to be able to have their own businesses, own property, vote. Rich white people who were in charge started to notice that they were outnumbered.
Yeah.
That if they were outnumbered, if Black people and white people came together from the same class, then they would push out the ruling class. That the working class would be the ones in power. The working class would be the ones calling the shots. And when working class call the shots, it's when we get better rights for the working class. It's when we build power for the working class. We get access to healthcare. We get access to better pay. We get access to land ownership. We get access to all these things that felt out of reach. It behooved them to separate everybody from that working class. The only way they could do that is by continuing this language of supremacy, of basically saying Black people are less than, they are inhuman, they are 3/5 of a person. You do not want to be lumped into that group of people who are 3/5 of a human. You want to be lumped with us, white people. We got you. We're white too. And so that is the basis of our country, and that continued, that proliferated, and white people bought into this lie of supremacy. At this point, they've been telling themselves this lie for so long, it almost becomes an existential crisis to let go of it. It's like, what if this thing that I thought to be true for so long is no longer true? I think it's too uncomfortable for too many people.
Wow. Yeah, that is a big one. I mean, how do you see that still playing out today? I mean, of course, it does still play out today, but
it's in everything. It's in literally every system. White supremacy is in every system in the United States. When we look at, I mean, this, all right, so look at segregation. Look at how we're still segregated. Look at the resources that communities of color versus white communities are given for educational purposes. Look at how arrest records. Look at how, when you look at drug use, it's the same across all races. But when you look at incarceration rates and arrest rates for those same, for drug offenses, you see that Black people are arrested and incarcerated at much higher rates. Like, it's in everything. It's like, it's not anywhere.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, getting people to understand that they have more in common with someone of their same class, regardless of race, seems like a really important part of this picture. Like solidarity amongst class, solidarity amongst working class folk to come together. And, you know, that's what I want to see, is that, you know, white people are just as engaged in this fight, if not more, because we got everyone here, you know, and it's like really taking the reins on this fight. And I guess what I want to move to now is like, what is that? If you've got the heart for it, you've got the curiosity, you've got the humility, what does it look like to start making power moves, to start, you know, sort of actually organizing? Because that's where I think someone like me, who's a creative, an artist, like, you know, can really learn from someone like you, who's actually really done a lot of groundwork in this stuff. And me and my friend Atafe, you know, really want to use this platform of Down the Rabbit Hole to hopefully make some real changes in the industry. But it can be overwhelming, right? Because you think, how could I ever change anything at the executive level? But what I'm starting to realize with all of these conversations is that if you get the foundation strong, of people on the ground, it can start to work its way up. And you have experience in seeing that happen. Talk to me about that.
Yeah. I mean, where do you begin? Um, I guess, um, it's
I
hard to say.
know it's hard, you know. How do
I
you
mean, I guess part of it is starting to read and inform yourself on all the micro and macro ways that people experience racism,
sure.
and try to identify ways that you yourself perpetuate that and undo those things, sort of really figure that out. Um,
Yeah.
Start by reading about it. Don't make your Black friend do the emotional labor of teaching you this stuff. You know,
Yeah.
go through the process of like informing yourself, um, really sort of becoming self-aware. If
Mm.
you do have a Black friend that you're very close to, not just like a Black person you have happen to know, if they feel comfortable sort of like talking through some of this stuff with you, if you have more questions. If they refuse, don't take that personally. It's not their job. But if you feel comfortable asking in the first place, um, because they are your close friend,
Right.
then then that's, you know, that's part of what I would do. Part of what helped me sort of get to where I am now is because I had close friends, close Black women
Mm.
who were patient with me when I said
Mm.
some wild ass shit. And
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
so grateful to them. I'm so grateful to my friends Alex and Skylar, um, who, yeah, who just took that time, um,
Mm.
to inform me of like why the things that I said or the things that I thought were problematic,
Yeah.
and pointed me in the direction of better resources for those things. But I also like I tried to be very conscientious in what I read and what I consumed to better inform myself to through that process. The other part of it is once you start to really become aware of those micro and macro things
Mm-hmm.
that happen in like people's everyday lives, is to then sort of build start to build power, bring more people into that,
Yep.
show other white people how you have grown, and show and walk them through the same process
Wow.
that you just went through. Start to undo those systems and use your collective power to call it out, especially in situations where if a Black person or a brown person were to call it out, it would put their job or something in jeopardy. Put
Mm.
yourself, like use your body, use your privilege, use your platform, and put yourself on the line in calling that stuff out. Be like, that's what it means to like be an ally.
Yeah.
um the other part of it is making sure that you're not taking up more space than you should be. And that part, like, I constantly have to remind myself, because even though I am Latina and I'm Puerto Rican, I'm very white passing. And there are experiences that I've never had, and it is not my place to talk about those things. um, you know, and I try to be very cognizant of, like, if someone invites me to be on a panel and I notice that it's like there aren't any Black people, and they're like, oh, well, how about you ask this person, this person, this
Mm-hmm.
person,
Mm-hmm.
and then like maybe if there's space for me, I'll also join them.
Yeah.
Sort of being aware of those levels of intersectionality, and making sure that those representations are put there, that it's not always your place to take that platform and to take the mic. Sometimes it's your turn to pass it. Sometimes it's never your turn to take the mic.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's and then just like continue growing, letting, like, making sure you're purposefully building on that snowball.
Yeah. And it's daily work, isn't it? That's what I'm learning from a lot of my guests is this stuff doesn't happen in a spurt. It's a kind of continued conversation with yourself, self-examination. And as you said, I mean, one of my first guests echoed this. the importance of white folk talking to other white folk, because
Oh yeah.
we've been having the conversations of under talking about the Black experience on platforms for a long time, but just like the Me Too movement, to draw a parallel there, as much as it was important to hear women's experiences, things didn't truly change until men started talking with other men in the locker rooms about this stuff, and it's standing
Right.
up for. And I think in the same way, that's so important. Um, Tell me, in your line of work, political campaign organizing, is when you start off an idea, you have a sort of strong goal that you have in mind. What are some of the first things that you do? Is it to sort of hold a meeting with everyone so that everyone's on the same page and has a clear idea? Is it, I want to kind of, for my own sake, I'm planning ahead of like, if I were to think about really implementing systemic change or demanding different values of the record labels that I work with, for example. What are some of what are the ways that you bring a team together over a united cause, so to speak? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I first start, when there's an issue, I first start with who's already working on this. There's no
Okay.
reason you should start that from scratch, and chances
Yeah.
are there's already someone working on it. Chances are that the person also who's already working on it is a person of color, because it's usually, that's the work that's usually made invisible. And part of why you ask yourself that is, obviously you don't want to start work that's already been started, and that's because that's more work for you, but also you don't want to step on the toes and of someone who's already been doing that work. You don't want to be presumptuous that because you've just been made aware of it, that no one else has up until that moment been made aware of it either. So I start there.
Right.
The other part of it is so that like figuring out who else is working on it helps you already build a coalition. Instead of building it one person at a time, you can sort of really figure out who are the other organizations that are doing this. So instead of being one person at a time, you're like already groups of people put together.
I love that.
It already has so much power if you're willing to work together in those groups rather than as individual folks working in silos. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So that's where I start. And then, if there are already people leading in this, I could sort of figure out what resources do they need that I can offer? What can I bring to the table that they don't currently have? How can I help them get to their goal? If for whatever reason there isn't necessarily a leadership, it's sort of figuring out how can we create that structure so that we build something stronger with a good foundation. And sort of build it from there. Obviously part of it is articulating what the goal is, like the main big end goal, and then sort of then creating smaller doable actions between now and the big goal. Because what I was telling you before is you can't just like, all right, tomorrow I want to dismantle racism. Or like tomorrow I want to dismantle the NYPD. Like I can't just do that tomorrow. I gotta, like, there's a bunch of stuff that I gotta do before then. And I know that if I started that work now, there aren't enough people in my coalition to make that happen. Like right now it's just a few thousand of us, and who's gonna listen to a few thousand of us? I gotta get that to be like millions of us saying that. And so really figuring out what those steps are between where I am now and where I want to be down the road, and what are the different actions we could do so that each time we do something, we gain more momentum, we gain more people who are on our side, we gain, we grow this coalition of folks that want to see that goal be achieved. And that's what it is in a nutshell.
No, that's super helpful. Like my brain doesn't work like this because I come from a different side of the brain where I think so much about just what I want to see up here. But again, that none of this, it's all a little idealistic if we don't get down to the nitty gritty of how actual change starts to get implemented. So I really appreciate that really practical breakdown. As someone who is a fan of music and is, involved in systemic work, what is something that you would personally like to see change in the system of the music industry?
So, I mean, one of the things that's bothered me about the music industry is, and this isn't only in the music industry. I see it in food. I see it in everything.
Yep.
Is that there's specific categories that are thought of as more legitimate than others. In music, that is music that is produced and created by white folks, whereas music that's created by Black and brown folks is, it sort of feels like less than. It feels like they view it as less artistic, less legitimate. It kind of bothers me that there's a separate category, and it's not very often that someone who makes urban music is put up for the same categories, like top album, as all the other types of music. So I'd love for that, for our kind of music to be legitimized, especially because so often when a white person takes the music that we do and sort of takes our influences and then they do it, it's thought of as like
Genius.
innovative and
Right.
brand new.
Oh yeah.
But
Oh
like a
yeah.
Black person or a brown person does it, it's like, it's not art.
And this is a perfect example of microaggressions, like to call music urban, to have these, Latinx awards that are specific. It keeps othering people, doesn't
Right.
it? Keeps reinforcing the narrative that whiteness has this sort of normality to it and everything else is othered. And, there's already
Right.
work.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like that whiteness is always the default in
Yeah.
almost everything that we do.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
know. And there's work being done already to erase those terms that I think is exciting in the industry, and to kind of look at why we have those terms at all. But it's going to take time. Like I see that these labels are not going to go quickly. It's going to be the demands of the artists to say, hey, and I mean, look, there's plenty of artists who refuse to go to the Grammy Awards, who refuse to engage, and that stuff does speak volumes, because there's no music industry without the artists. So I always try to remind myself of that. We're approaching, such an important time in this country. I, of course, can't vote, but I'm taking as much interest in um, doing my best to influence my fan base to vote at this time. And I know that's a big part of your work. If you had one thing, or a couple of things, I'm sure there's plenty of things, that you wish that white folk were really talking about, engaging about with other white folk, what comes to mind?
Um, oh boy, that one's hard to answer because there is so much. If What would I want them to be? I mean, obviously, what I mentioned before, I want y'all to be talking about how you partake and be really honest with yourselves and how you are partaking in some of these micro and macro aggressions.
Mm.
How you partake in the system, in a system of white supremacy, and how, especially white women, how they show solidarity to their whiteness, but not necessarily to other women of color. Like they're white. It always seems like white women are white first and women second. And to sort of start undoing that. But the puzzle piece that I'm always trying to sort of figure out is, I would break down white folks into categories. There's the white folks who want to do the work, who will, like, when you show them what they've done wrong, they'll fix that stuff. There's the white folks who, when you start showing them this new truth, this new reality, the thing that dismantles the thing that they thought was true, they'll get really defensive, and turn it off completely. And then there's the group of white folks who won't even examine it at all, who will never have to be faced with it ever in their lives, who will never have to think about white supremacy, that's not something that they'll ever have to question.
Yeah.
What I want to figure out, and what I want y'all to figure out, is how you can turn some of those folks, especially the ones in the middle category of like the white folks who get defensive and turn off, into white folks who hear this stuff and start fixing it in themselves. That's really what I would want other white people to start really thinking about, really working on, hammering away at, and finding the solution to. Because for so long I thought, it was on us. And I thought that part of why we weren't getting through is because I was saying it the wrong way. But it doesn't matter. Like, I could say it anyway, like as politely as I possibly can. It's not how I say it, it's the message. So how can white folks sort of convert some of those people in the middle who get defensive and turn them into people who want to do the work?
That's spot on, Christina. Where do you think, and I mean this is just me talking out loud, but where do you think that existential guilt comes from? Because I mean I feel it rise up in me sometimes too. You know, you want to be able to be seen that you're on the good side, and you don't want to identify with the Anglo-Saxon kind of, you know, settler colonial white. But at the same time, you know, and you get comments, you know, get people sort of saying, well, why should I feel guilty about being white? And this sort of like rhetoric of like, why, it's not my fault, you know. But how do we get away from that question? Because it doesn't feel like that's asking the right question. The right question is how can I now, as a more, you know, hopefully more highly evolved person, recognize my role in this? That, yeah, of course I didn't ask for, you know, no one chooses what they're born into. That's obvious. Like, of course. It's a question of what do you do with what you're born into, and how do you understand it? And I would love as well, you know, to see less of the existential angst that comes up around this, because a Puerto Rican woman, a black woman, I mean, there's no room, there can't be any room for that. You know, you don't see that happen amongst other races in the way that you do with white people. And I feel like that's such a barrier to getting people over the line and into engagement, is this sort of complacency, and also like resistance to wanting to admit or feel guilty, especially if you haven't done personal wrong, you know, a personal wrong. Again, I'm just kind of spitfiring with you now, like where does it come from, and like what are some successful ways that you, as a really eloquent speaker, I think, have gotten through to people and sort of maneuvered your way around that trigger button and into the heart of what's important, you know?
That's a good question. I mean, the guilt, it's not how do we make sure that there isn't guilt, it's how do we convince people to sit in that discomfort? How do we convince people that discomfort is going to be a natural part of it, and you don't need to turn away from it? I think that, you know, maybe, I don't know if that's a cultural thing in this country, that we don't like to feel, unpleasantness, that we run away from that we self-medicate to make sure that we don't feel those things. But I think part of it is sort of getting people to accept the discomfort, not to say that there shouldn't be guilt, because there will be guilt, there will be discomfort. It's to accept that there will be, and sort of like make sure that what you're saying to them is that they're going to be safe in that discomfort. Part of why that discomfort and the guilt happens is because there's been such an association with racist equals bad person.
Right.
They don't want to be thought as a bad person, because everyone wants to think that they are the hero of the story. You know, it's human nature to think that because the story is revolving around you, that you must be the hero of it. People don't want to think of themselves as not the hero. And that's really hard for folks to get past. I mean, I'm trying to think of when I've done that work where it's sort of, I guess an example I could give is with my sister. And part of why it worked was because she's my sister, because I could sort of be a little bit harder on her and sort of say, like, the thing you said and the way that you think right now is very racist, and I need you to think beyond that. And she was always very defensive about it, and it would, because I was persistent in making sure she learned better, that she eventually got to where she is now. Part of it is just giving examples. I think that part of it is why people think the way that they do is because they've not seen these examples. So I'm gonna give an example here. My sister was wondering why more Black people don't know how to swim.
Okay.
And I'm like, Rox, because of racism. She's like, what do you mean? Like, there's pools here in Harlem. There's public pools. Like, I see them. Like, there's no excuse for Black people to not know how to swim. I'm like, girl, because you got to understand that a lot of these public pools that are public now to Black people, they weren't always public to Black people. It was thought that if a Black person touch that water was contaminated. That was internalized forever. Black people never were allowed to learn how to swim. And also think about the schools that Black people went to. Like, do you think that schools that Black people went to had swimming pools for them to learn how to swim? Nah. And so like really undoing that came like she needed to see the history behind it. She needed to sort of see the information. She needed to see the experience of why that would end up the way that it was. But that's also just how my sister thinks. That might not always be the way. That is the system. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, someone's comments like, yes, look up the history of why Black people don't swim. It's racism.
Yep.
Anyway,
yeah.
but yeah, like it, you know, part of it is that. Part of it is just, you know, it is persistence. It is sort of, I don't know. Sometimes I can't tell you because sometimes I get too impatient with white people to make it to the other side. Sometimes I just get so impatient that I'm like, well, that's not a person I need to have in my life anymore.
Sure. And I mean, I think that that's totally part of this process as well. I've had a lot of my friends say that it's, you know, quality over quantity at this point, and the people that in my life are the ones that are going to have to stand with the issues I care about, and that makes sense. And I think, again, it shouldn't be your job as a person, you know, a Puerto Rican living here in America, to be the educator constantly. It should be also on my back as a person, you know, immigrant living here, but still very much a person of privilege in this country that has a platform that I might not have if I was born into a different body. So I want to, you know, reinforce that it's normal that you would get impatient with this, because it has been being said for so long, and we are just still seeing such a lack of sobriety around the issue. And I use that word sobriety because that's how I explain my journey with racism, is this kind of lifting of the veil and seeing things as they really are, ways that I'd made assumptions about things. And again, like, I had made assumptions about the police force and about various ways that the law worked in America until I received the right information. And, you know, I'm really grateful that there are people like you that work so hard, dude. I can see like that I mean, it must just get so exhausting sometimes to keep turning up for the good fight. But I really get it. I get excited too when I see this sort of solidarity forming between, you know, musicians in the industry, and also, you know, me learning from someone like you is in a totally different field, but there's so much crossover. So it's an exciting time, and I think it's really important that we don't all get burned out by this, but that we keep feeling excited by it. And a lot of these conversations, I want to encourage people to be okay with the discomfort. And you know, I want you to make me feel uncomfortable, you know, because it's like, that's important too. And I appreciate that, you know, I appreciate the honesty. Yeah, look, Christina, I'm probably going to wrap it up, but I want to just open the space for you to kind of talk about anything that's on your heart right now as we come closer to a very important time. And you've been working so hard to kind of ensure that we get a positive outcome for this country moving forward. So yeah, is there anything that you just want to speak to on this issue before we wrap up?
I mean, I guess I would ask folks who are watching to make sure that you continue this work after the election. I know that we're all worn out. I'm dead tired. I wake up every morning so tired, and I get it, especially because like we're in a pandemic and we don't get the usual human interaction that can be really exhausting. But I'm gonna ask people not to unplug, to realize that there are still fights worth fighting, that are way bigger than Trump, that the system that created Trump, that allowed Trump to rise to power, will persist. It'll still be the system that occupies New York, this country. So that's one. That's of top mind. I also wanted to make sure that I answered one of the questions that someone brought up, because I've been talking a lot about the NYPD and defunding the NYPD and sort of taking it down. And someone asked me in the comments, like, why is that something that I want to dismantle? Part of what, you know, folks need to realize is that there's so many issues in our society that we have decided that the best way to answer those issues and solve those issues is by putting money towards punishment and to put money towards incarceration, essentially, and to put money towards the police. There's a lot of issues that are not solved because we put money into punishing people. A lot of people don't end up stealing because they figure there's not enough punishment for it. You know, people don't do these things. They don't commit these illegal acts because they sort of weigh that out in their head. Well, what are the repercussions for it? Oh, they're too high. You know what? Today, I'm not going to do that illegal thing. That's not what, like, why people do or don't do illegal things. People do or don't do illegal things because of the resources that are available to them. And for so long, we have chosen consciously to put more money into the punishment and the incarceration and to take it away from those resources. And so it is so important that we start to rethink how we do this. So what if instead of punishing people, we actually gave them the necessary resources? Would we actually see crime rates drop? Would we actually see our neighborhoods get safer? And at the same time, make sure that people are living healthy, well-balanced lives with access to education and housing. Like, we could do both of those things. I know that so much of the fear is that we can only be safe, or we can or give people these resources, but we could be both of those things. We could kill two birds with one stone by choosing to fund these systems. The question is, why don't we choose that? And it's because it behooves, the same reason why we created racism in the first place. It behooves people in power to keep people in poverty. If people are poor, they are too tired to rise up and fight together. So that is why I want to defund the NYPD, because if we get more money to people aren't so tired all the time, people get the resources that they need, people, like, our communities can change. So
it's kind of simple when you boil it down like that, huh? It's like this is about human rights and about resources so that we can all thrive and not just be barely surviving. Yeah, man, thank you for that. Thanks for unpacking that a bit, because it's actually still something that a lot of people still don't fully understand when we say defund the police. And, you know, I think you've done a really good job of explaining that for me and hopefully for others. So Instagram's going to kick us off, so I'm going to wrap this up. Thank you, Cristina, for just giving time to be part of this conversation. I believe this is where it starts, right? You just have to have the conversations first, and then you start putting pen to paper, hopefully, and drawing our power map grid.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, no, just get some sleep, girl, you know, and hopefully I'll see you real soon in the future. Thank you again.
All right, awesome. Thanks for having me.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Remember to
Bye.
tune back in next Monday, 8 p.m. EST. Bye-bye.